It's been absolutely amazing getting to know Oman and meeting you all. It's been beautiful. I've loved the last couple of days, so thank you. I'll start, I guess, with where the journey started for me. So, as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm British. I was born in England, in London, to a Ghanaian father from West Africa, obviously, and a British English mother from Windsor. I'm the youngest of 3 siblings. My brother is 35, my sister is 33, and then there's me. Now, where we grew up was in a council estate in southwest London. So for clarity, a council estate is essentially an area that is full of properties owned by local authorities, which is supposed to be affordable housing. So to give you a context, despite the fact that this was supposed to be affordable housing, my parents couldn't really afford it. So the first thing, I guess, that we were challenged with was a lack of financial support within our household. So although my parents were both 2 very hardworking, loving parents, they also, in their own background, had suffered, I think personally, suffered their own demons and had struggled too. So although they were trying their very best in our household, it definitely wasn't easy. Now, what happened growing up very quickly was those issues that they probably brought with them from their own childhood manifested themselves in our household. So my eldest brother probably experienced it the worst, being the firstborn, and then there was my sister, and then there was myself. Now, interestingly, my brother went on to be a Great Britain sprinter, and he represented Great Britain for many years, and then he went on to represent Ghana. So for us, within the family, he was our star. My dad used to call him Longshine, because he was really tall, and before going into sprinting, he was a high jumper. Then there was my sister, and she is very caring, very warm, a very committed primary school teacher. And actually, when we look back, she probably exhibited a lot of the qualities that any good primary school teacher would have had. And then there was me. And if I'm completely honest, I didn't know what I was ever going to be. I didn't really know what my talent was. I didn't know what I was good at all. And I think that probably had something to do with the environment in which I grew up in. It wasn't necessarily the most positive or aspirational, certainly not in the household and certainly not outside of the household. So I called my mum last night and I said, I'm going to be speaking tomorrow in front of all these wonderful people, and I need to kind of tell them something that I'm good at. So do you have any memory of me as a child where you can tell me what I was starting to show signs of? And she said, you're always really helpful. You always wanted to help me wash up and clean and keep things tidy. You're really busy, always busying yourself, and you're really independent. You'd come home from dropping, with her, from dropping my brother and sister at school, and I'd go upstairs and I'd play by myself for hours. And she said by the time she came upstairs and see what I was doing, I'd have my own little family sat there, all make-believe, and I'd be bossing them around and telling them what they needed to do. So independent, bossy, always keeping myself busy and always trying to help, she said, were things that I exhibited at a young age. Now, everything sort of changed for me when I was at age 7. And when I say that out loud now, it's quite concerning because I have friends who have 7-year-olds, and what I realised at that age, I hope they don't have to realise. But there was an incident taking place in my house that involved my mum, my dad, and my brother. It wasn't a pleasant incident. It involved a lot of shouting and hostility. And I remember feeling helpless and quite scared, if I'm honest. And so I sat upstairs in my bedroom to try and lock myself away from what was going on in the house. And I put my fingers in my ears and I went to try and block out the noise, as a 7-year-old would do when you're scared. But what I did say to myself, I remember, I sat on the floor and I've got my fingers in my ears and I'm making that funny sound. And I said, this cannot go on. This can't be your future. And by that, what I meant was this feeling of vulnerability, this instability. I needed to get out of what I felt was not a brilliant environment. Now, make no mistake, I'm very close to my parents. I love my parents and I love my siblings. But certainly our start in life was not desirable. So, fast forward to 16 years old. I'm just finishing my GCSEs. I've decided at 7 I'm going to really go for it and just study really, really hard. In my household, education was a big thing. My dad always used to say, you must study hard, you must study hard. If you study hard, you'll do okay. So that was my focus. So when I finished what we have in the UK GCSEs, I'd got some really good grades. So I start my sixth form, so my further education, and I turn up and I say to the careers advisor, look, I have to get a job after university because in my household there won't be anybody that can support me, so I need to make a contribution to my future today. And she seemed quite overwhelmed by that, I think, and thought, God, that's quite a strong statement from such a young girl. But we've stayed friends ever since, actually, and what she helped me to do was start me on my path into my own career. So she says, well, what do you like doing? And at this point, the only thing I really liked doing, aside from being with friends and family, was watching an interviewer in the UK called Michael Parkinson. In fact, Sir Michael Parkinson now. And he used to have a chat show on a Friday night, and he'd bring lots of famous people in and he would speak to them about their careers. And for that moment that he was on the TV, I used to kind of lose myself in the stories of these famous, successful people. These could be famous sports stars, actors, performers. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to do what he does and get to speak to people like that are so inspiring? But I didn't see anyone that looked like me doing that. So then again, that just becomes another sort of dream, a pipe dream, one that's not really achievable. And so I explained to her, well, that's the only thing I like to do. And she says, okay, well, we'll try and get you some work experience. Maybe we could get you working for a TV company or working for a magazine. My first reaction was, no, definitely not a TV company. I don't want to be on telly. I don't want anyone to know who I am. I don't want to do anything like that. She said, what about writing? I thought, well, that's okay. No one will ever know who I am. So I left the office and I went to the local newsagents and I bought a load of magazines and I applied for work experience. And I probably applied for about 60 different publications. And literally, following that day, I was rejected by every single publication. Every single one. And then finally, probably about 6 months later, I got one reply which said, yes, you can come and do some work experience. Now, this was a massive, massive deal for me because not many people like me on the estate that I just described would have ended up working on one of these magazines, not even for work experience. And that was very much brought to life when I turned up for my first day and I got there. There was nobody there that was from an ethnic minority. There was nobody that seemed as poor as me. I mean, when I say poor, I had to choose between whether I paid for my travel to get to work experience or whether I ate my lunch because I couldn't afford to do both. So the environment in which I came into was very much an upper-class, white, male-orientated environment. And I did not understand how on earth I would have ever fitted in here. But the first thing I also noticed was, what about all those people back where I lived who too might want to work somewhere like this? They also probably feel that there's no place for them. And actually, in turning up here, it kind of feels like that. So as shy as I was, I couldn't say a word to anybody. I didn't know what to say. I felt like I stood out, just really felt like I stood out. So eventually, on the third day of just kind of tidying up, making, filing things and photocopying things and filling up cupboards and tidying cupboards, all those fun things, I decided that I would try and get somebody to speak to me. So the one thing I used to do when my mum was sad at home, if her and my dad had had a fallout, was I would say, would you like a cup of tea? And if I went and brought her a cup of tea and I sat with her, suddenly her whole mood changed and she was happy again. So I thought, I'll tell you what, I'm going to offer them a cup of tea. So I went over to a desk and I said, would anybody like a cup of tea? To which they all sort of finally noticed me and said, yes, we'd like one. So I came back with my tray and these cups of tea, and from that day they did not forget me. I was invited to do interviews, I was offered the opportunity to attend press conferences, and I absolutely loved it. Now, it's my final day at work experience, and I say, how on earth will I get to come back here? I never want to leave. I want to be able to do this forever. And I think, but how would someone like me get to do that? So I asked one of the gentlemen, if I want to come back here, what should I do? And he said, bribe them. So I said, how do you mean? He said, buy some chocolates, buy some sweets, and give it to the lady in charge and say you had a good time here. And I promise you she'll remember you. So I did that, but I also wrote her a note. And in my note, I wrote how much of an impact this week of work experience had had on me and how much value I'd taken from it. And as a result, she cried. I thought, I'm definitely not going to be invited back now. I've made her cry. But she actually said, no, it's very touching and you're welcome here anytime. So now let's fast forward. I continue my studies, but every time that I'm not in a lecture or I don't have to go to classes, I went back to the magazine. Then I did so well there, they recommended me to somebody else, and to somebody else, and to somebody else. Now, throughout my degree, my A-levels, my degree, and then my master's, I constantly worked within a different magazine. What then happened was, at the same time as I'm doing this, I'm still noticing very few ethnic minorities, very few people from the working class background that I described. So I thought, what could I do about this? So at 18, while I was still studying, I set up what I called a recruitment offering. I thought there must be something I can do to increase the number of people like me working here. So I used me as the case study, and I thought, well, what did you need, Joe? What did you need to get into this industry? I needed mentoring and advice. I needed experience so that I could compete with the middle-class people that had just been happily getting that quite easily. I needed education. I needed to be as good as everybody else, if not better. And I needed to ensure that I had a growing network of people who would constantly think about opportunities for me. So the first thing I did was I set up a mentoring program. And what I did was I asked universities who had a representation of people from diverse backgrounds, and I asked those students to get in touch with me. They did so. Following that, I then created a mentoring program for a year. And in this program, I asked the senior leaders in each organisation. I did this for two reasons. One, I wanted people that were on this mentoring program to feel educated, empowered, and best advised on how they could move forward. But I also wanted those senior leaders to take ownership of the fact that they too had to make some decisions that made their industry much more inclusive. As a result, I knew that if I connected two people together, they would get along, they would see what inspired one another, and they'd help each other. And that worked. I knew that if a senior leader met a young person and was able to learn from that young person, and a young person met a senior leader and was able to break down any kind of barrier around how high profile they were, then some magic would happen, and it did. So for the first year, I'll spare you the details, but it's quite a detailed program, I managed to place 25 people directly into work. So then I go, wow, this actually works. I know how to do this. So I said, well, let's not stop there. We've got a proven method that works. If you take people from diverse backgrounds and you give them the right tools and support, their talent shines through, we can find them a job. So I ran that program for another 3 years. And by this point, I'm still only 20 years old. We've placed 150 people into permanent work. So then I'm like, wow. So the reason I called it a recruitment offering is because at that point, I didn't really know what recruitment was. All I knew was that I was good at finding someone who just needed a bit of polishing up. And as Dr. Mariam said earlier, shine media. That was the point. We'd shine them up, polish them up, and send them off to go and create some brilliant things. So I knew by this point I was good at that. My next barrier, however, came up. I mentioned to you already that we didn't have any money. We were a very poor family. Now, in the UK, all of the best journalists and all those best creatives seem to come out of two universities, really. Both of which had a price tag of about £9,000. Now, this is coming from the girl who had to choose between travel and lunch, so I certainly didn't have £9,000 for my course. So then I thought about, well, look at all the other people who too wouldn't have the money for this course, but are as passionate and as driven as perhaps you are. So what I did was I went to the university who had these courses. I asked them if they had any bursaries. I applied for several, and I managed to get one. That meant, though, that I was hired by the BBC, which is one of the biggest broadcasters in the UK. So they paid for me to study, and then they offered me a job for 6 months following. So I thought, right, brilliant. Using me as the case study, if you have the right network and you have the right education, you can get through. What about the others, however? I couldn't ever keep walking forward without looking back and seeing who was behind. And that was a big thing for me since I was a little child. And the first thing I did was I asked for the course criteria and the accreditation for the course that they were charging £9,000 for. And I said, let me have that. And they gave that to me. I went away, and as I said earlier, I'd done lots of work experience, so I'd built a network of really highly reputable and respectable journalists. And I asked them to give up their time for free, as I had been, to train people that I was going to find from various backgrounds. These could be people from different cultures, faiths, with different abilities, those with disabilities. I didn't mind who it was, I just wanted people that would struggle to get into this industry. All I wanted was talent and ambition. So we put the course together and I selected 25 people to go on this course. Now, nobody would fund this program. Nobody would fund it at all. So I used the salary that I was earning from the BBC to fund it myself. So I had to pay for a venue myself. I had to pay for, snacks for the young people when they came in. I had to pay for material, technicians, so that they could help with the training. And then obviously the teachers gave up their time for free, as I did. At the end of that course, we placed all 25 people into direct employment. So again, I realised the training works. But I didn't want to stop here. By this point, we start to win awards. But I wouldn't tell anybody about these awards, so I'd go and collect them, and I'd leave them on the side. My mum and dad would know, and my family, and that was it. It wasn't something that I was really sharing, and it was at a time when social media wasn't as popular as it is now. Anyway, before I knew it, other companies, global media companies, were starting to hear about this Joanna and this Shine Media, and what does she know about recruiting? And so they'd asked me to take a look at some of the opportunities they had coming up. These might be for interns, these might be for graduates, postgraduates. And as a result, I would come up with unique ways to assess these young people so that if they didn't succeed through the traditional route that those companies were using, they could still get in. And before I knew it, 8 years passes by. I'm still a full-time journalist. I've moved from the BBC to many different places. But I'm a full-time journalist, so I'm running this training, and all of this extra work is happening after I finish my job. 8 years later, we do an impact report, and before I know it, we've placed 3,000 people into work, whether that was through a permanent role or a freelance opportunity. But I wasn't going to stop there. So that's great. We've got lots of young people in. We've now seen those young people support the next round of young people, so now we're starting to see them move into middle management. Brilliant. Okay, so what happens at the top? What about the senior leaders? What are we doing at the top to make sure that that's representative of the industry? And you can just Google this and read several reports, and you'll see that in the UK, our representation at senior leadership level for diversity and diversity of thought and culture and backgrounds and gender is not in a great state. So I decided that Shine Media had to graduate with me. So by this point, I've won awards, I'm running the business, and I decide I'm no longer going to be a journalist, I'm going to focus just on my business. You notice there's a difference in my language now. It's not an offering, it's a business. And it became a business because something I cared about, which was a social cause, which I believe is my purpose, without me realising, and purely fueled by my love for this change, and seeing these people do so well in their lives, graduated into what became a sustainable business. But I wanted more. So I decided that I would try and connect with an already established global recruitment business that operated in several territories. I came across one called S3, and they operate in over 33 territories. They have over 4,000 staff, and in the UK they're a FTSE 250 company. I met the CEO, and he too was passionate about diversity. So for about a year, while I was still running the business, he mentors me. And he says, eventually after this year, he says, why don't you bring the brand into the PLC? And I go, no, not my baby, not Shine Media. What will you do to it? And he reassured me that we would keep everything, all its values and everything we were trying to do, but we would tackle the problem at the top and at the middle. And so Hyden became, so Shine Media became Hyden, and Hyden was the original spelling of hidden. And the reason we chose that was purely because we knew there was all this untapped talent that because they didn't maybe look like the leaders in those companies, they were not tapped into, they were not valued in the way that they should have been. So in 2016, Shine Media becomes Hyden, and it becomes a part of this global recruiter. Now we're placing people in at executive level, so the CEOs, the CIOs, and we're making sure that they're diverse, so that actually the values I had, that I learnt from the age of 7, and they've come through with me on my journey, are actually going to start infiltrating at the top and pushing all the way through. As a result of the work that I've done there, I've also been asked to sit on a number of boards. So in London, we have the Mayor of London, and then we have the Mayor for the City of London, which is probably known, the City of London, more as a hub of the middle classes and the people that have done well in life, who have been to brilliant schools, brilliant universities, the Oxfords and the Cambridges. I sit on that board now, and we work on a number of initiatives. And we work on a number of initiatives. They help young people. They support individuals with mental health problems. We run a particular charity, or support a particular charity that goes into schools to provide coaching to ensure the well-being of young people. Something, as I said earlier, I think is super important, because I was 7 years old when the impact of my environment was really starting to take effect. Following on from that, we also do a lot of work around making sure that the city is savvy and set up for a digital future. So what started as just something I recognised on my own journey of work experience at 16 became, and which was really just a bedroom business, then became a much bigger international offering, and now a global one. So I share that with you because I hope that inspires you to see that actually the only thing I had back then was an idea and a fire in my belly. I didn't have any money. I didn't have a resource. I didn't have support. I literally just knew what it was that I could change, and using my own experiences, I tried to remove all the barriers. Now, one thing I will say is that's the first bit. Removing the barriers is the first part of the journey. Getting people in that's actually the easier bit, believe it or not. The piece around inclusion is much harder. There's many people who are working in a business today who are not themselves. They do what they think they should do. They behave as they think they should behave. They put the face forward that they think that environment wants from them. And actually what I do now with these leaders is I explain to them that they are not getting the most out of their people because they do not invest in those people bringing their authentic self to work. Every single one of us has something unique to offer, and we need an environment where we're allowed to show off those unique experiences and bring them to life. So my challenge to you all is to make sure that when you leave here today, you take everything from what you've heard, from everybody that you've heard today, that really the only person standing in your way of making any change is you. And actually all it really takes is an idea. Ideas are your currency. It just takes an idea and a social purpose, and there is no shame in making a living from a good cause. And there's no shame in that. It took me a while to understand that, but there is no shame in that. In my ability to find a commercial way to run my business has allowed me to grow it. It hasn't made me rich, but it's allowed me to grow it, which means that now when I turn on my TV at home, I see a young girl that I trained, and she's reading the news. It means that when I go out to watch a TV program, I can see the credits go down the screen, and I know those people because I helped. So sometimes it's about just listening to your inner voice, owning your experiences, whether they're great or not great, like my home life, and turning them into a triumph. And that's what I'd like to leave you with. Thank you very much.